Hello and welcome to the State of Education presented by One Room Education. I'm your host, Katie Jones. I'm also the founder of One Room Education, where we are on a mission to help empower parents, students, and educators to take back control of their education and help foster the most free and prosperous generation yet. We're doing that through advocacy for a classical mastery-based education, as well as home-based when possible. Today, I am so excited. We have my good friend Mary Cochron back on. If you watch the live stream relaunch, you know her. And I'm super excited for the conversation today because everyone knows, if they've listened to the State of Education podcast or visited one-roomeducation.com, which if you haven't visited the website recently, we now have membership options, and we're getting ready to open the One Room Classroom. So make sure to put in your name and email address, and we'll shoot you over a link as soon as the classroom opens. So if you've been there, then you know one of my biggest pet peeves with the public education system is the practice of high stakes testing. And I broke down what that was a little bit. I'll make sure to link those episodes and those articles in the description of this episode. But pretty much my understanding of high stakes testing is putting things on students that aren't the student's responsibility, like teacher wage increases or teacher promotions or the funding for the school district that shouldn't have anything to do with the students, and it just creates test anxiety and issues for the students. So Mary and I have been talking about this, and she has some thoughts, and I'm very excited to share her and her thoughts with you. Why don't you just introduce yourself? Go ahead.
All right. Yeah. Well, I am an assessment specialist. I do not endorse the name bean counter, though. Not very
Sorry.
good bean counter. No, it's
that's
totally
me.
fair. It's not the first time that's been used. But I am a specialist. Actually, I'm an educator first, and found myself specializing in assessment and found myself in the industry of large scale assessment. But I don't just focus on the big, large scale assessment, the tests, right?
Mm-hmm.
I look at assessment a little bit differently in that it is a process. And there is so much more there than just these large scale tests that kind of give the word assessment a bad rap. In fact, I'll be honest, there's many years that I didn't even tell people what I did for work outside of kind of my immediate circles, because if I was, say, like, on an airplane and having a kind of a, oh, what do you do? I would say things like I do educational research, or I do educational consulting, and they go, oh, well, and then it just kind of goes from there. And because there's so many thoughts and feelings around the word assessment, and that goes for not just people working with kids and students in a variety of capacities, but also just general public, right? Because we've all had some sort of experience with it. So when I talk about assessment and proudly now say I'm an assessment specialist, what I'm talking about is assessment as a process that supports curriculum and instruction. And it has to be a part of a larger process because I absolutely do believe that we need information. But there are better ways to get at that information because the numbers don't tell the whole story. So,
Right?
So I have lots of
Preach it,
opinions.
sister.
I've seen lots of wild and crazy things over the years. So a little bit of background, my background, for our audience, and so you kind of know where I'm coming from. I started my career in education teaching. I was a secondary teacher, and then after that I spent some time on school site as a teacher on special assignment in an administrative position, and then from there I went to a district level position where I was working in research, evaluation, and assessment, and that's how I kind of fell into this assessment world. Well, that experience of bringing teachers together to build their own tests that would be administered locally across the district was such a profound learning experience for me. I fell in love with it because I saw the power when it's done right.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, those tests, we spent a year and a half, almost a little bit more than that, it was almost 2 years, 2 school years, bringing scores of teachers from across a large urban district together to build to the new standards. Were actually shut down by the union because there was hand scoring. So we spent almost 2 years on a project of teacher created tests to be used across the district that were never allowed to be seen or used, unfortunately, because they didn't agree that there should be any hand scoring. But what we were trying to do was take it away and out of the very limited kind of multiple choice and try to have more authentic evaluations of student learning and provide other ways of students to express their learning. But that kind of ran up against some pretty hard limits. But what that did do, it was a hugely instructive experience. And so that led to another leadership role in another district in a different state even. And I got to be the bad man, the bad guy. I was the bad guy and representing you know, the I was the man during anti-testing movement in the Pacific Northwest during the kind of early years of Common Core testing and everything. And
Mhm.
yeah, I was the person that had a police escort into board meetings. So, but what was amazing about that experience was being able to talk to parents and to explain what was happening and try to parse out like the misinformation from the real information and focus on, well, what are what are the real problems here and what are the adult behaviors around our kids that influence their anxiety, their stress level. And I was in a state where they allowed opting out, and so it was pretty kind of a matter of fact of, here's what it's going to be, here are your options, and as a parent you should exercise them. So that actually was a wonderful experience, and from there, because of the work that I did at the district level, I got the attention of the State Department and I became director of assessment in that state. And just the having the experience of being on that level of policy development, policy, and kind of application and enforcement in some cases, and maintaining my position that the numbers don't tell the whole story. It's only a snapshot. It has very limited uses, and for its limited uses is appropriate, but beyond that, it's not. And so I've spent actually a lot of my career advocating for less testing and less data collection, because if we don't know what we're doing with that data, we shouldn't be collecting it. Now, I do believe, and this is where we might disagree, Katie, I do believe that it is a more dangerous route to not test at all. But that said, I think there's so many things that can be done differently in how we're approaching testing in our schools and how we're even thinking about this idea of assessment. Because a lot of people, they hear the word assessment and they just think test.
Right.
And that's just so limited. I mean, that's like limiting a test to multiple choice questions, right?
Yeah.
There's so much more power in this tool of gathering evidence of student learning as they're learning. That's assessment as a process. So anyway, so the last, over the years, I've worked, after working at a State Department, ended up going to the vendor side, and I've worked with more than 8 states across the United States over the last 8 years, working with their statewide assessments. But I have to say, the last couple years, I kind of stepped away from that side of being a vendor to try to work closer with schools and districts, because
Mhm.
that's where the change really, I believe, needs to happen, and where I see too much testing actually happening. So yeah, that's a little bit about my background and my philosophy and some of my experience professionally. And but I gotta say though, one more thing
Mhm.
is that all that sounds well and good, and but honestly, it was when I became a stepmom and I saw the kind of information that was coming to me as a parent. And I was like, I don't even understand what they're trying to tell me. And I have
Mm-hmm.
all of this knowledge and background and experience, and I don't even understand what they're trying to tell me. That was a kind of a moment of awakening of like, I've got to do something different in working with closer to schools and districts. So that's what I'm trying to do. And I'm super excited to collaborate with you on anything just because it doesn't matter to me if you're in
Mm-hmm.
a traditional public school or a charter school or a private school of any kind of makeup or homeschooling. You're working with kids, and there there are really positive ways to use assessment as a process and a tool to help our kids see where they're going, how
Mm-hmm.
see reflect on their own progress, right? See evidence of their own learning, and then it becomes motivational, and then it becomes empowering, and then it becomes a tool for their learning instead of a weapon. So I'm excited to talk with you and share whatever I can and help wherever I can, because that's my goal. Is I don't want the charge to be we stop doing all testing,
Mm-hmm.
because that's so much more dangerous. So much more dangerous.
Absolutely. And that's so okay, I have some thoughts and some notes.
Yes.
So first off, I did say that we need to get rid of the high stakes testing several times. That I've said that. But I have also admitted that I did not know if there was an alternative that can be implemented on a large scale.
Okay. Okay. So,
So that's kind of where I am, because the high stakes, like no child left behind, every child succeeds kind of crap, like everything it's tied to.
mm,
Like, okay, so every student needs to have benchmarks set, and you need to make sure that you're reaching those benchmarks in some capacity, right? Whether it's a verbal knowledge check, whether it's a worksheet that got completed successfully, whether it's a standard, like actual test, like what we think of. There are so many ways of checking for knowledge,
yes.
like knowledge comprehension, that are not used on a regular basis, that are accepted by the school districts as valid knowledge checks. Do you know what
Right,
I
right.
mean?
Yeah, I do. But
And
let's
yeah.
before we go any further though, I want to tease something out though, because this happens constantly.
Hmm.
The idea of assessment is so much more complex, and I think that it's really worth taking a moment to kind of to parse this out a little bit.
Yes, please do.
And I'm going to use an analogy that to try to parse this out a little bit. And Katie, you know where I'm going with this, because I've shared this with you before this recording. But I do think I think it's valuable to help um, explain how different these kinds of checks for understanding really are, and what makes them valid and what makes them useful is different. And so
Hmm.
um, there's assessment in the classroom level, and that can be created by the teacher. It might be from the curriculum, from the parent who's creating it for their child, right? And that is something that's very unique to that context. It
Hmm.
is absolutely grounded in what they're doing, and that's giving immediate information to who is crafting the next learning experience for that kid, right?
Hmm.
Okay. Now, that is very different than what we're going to see when we talk about the tests that are used within a school or a district
Hmm.
that are not required by the state. And I think this middle level is very much misunderstood by parents, because it gets rolled up into the stuff that's required by the state. And
Hmm.
then we think that it's all required, but there's big differences between what is required by a school or district that at the local level and what's required by the state. And that's where we get that, like, No Child Left Behind, now ESSA, right?
Yeah.
So focusing on this middle level, these are things that they might use words like interims, or uh, it might be chapter tests or things like that. And you're not going to see a lot of these kinds of tools um, marketed the same way to homeschooling parents. You're going
Hmm.
to see them marketed to homeschool parents like a progress monitoring tool that's embedded in the curriculum or ties to this curriculum.
Okay.
And these are like They could be called diagnostics sometimes.
Okay.
Sometimes they're
Yeah.
called, like the interim checkpoints, or you know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
but it's all the language you're going to see is always around growth and progress monitoring, right? It's
Okay.
through year kind of assessments,
Hmm.
um, and assessment tools that then they might be on the computer, they might be a part of curriculum or something like that. And those have really great value in a school system. In a homeschool environment, it's a little bit different because you are tailoring so much to your child. You're really leaning into that classroom level assessment
Hmm.
and creating on the fly, right?
Right.
And so you don't see that middle ground right there, which is also why you see a lot less testing in homeschool environments and some charter and private school environments, because they don't have that kind of like really prescriptive district level assessment,
Hmm.
okay, where they're trying to monitor systems during the year. That's actually where we're seeing the most testing times explode. That's
Okay.
where we're seeing a lot more requirements on testing, and testing like on a weekly basis in some places.
So what does that look like? Like if you have your kid
Mhm.
in a classroom, like as classroom teachers, we both served in both served at the mass
Yeah.
in the classrooms. But so as classroom teachers, we know that we create the worksheets, we create the like chapter or like unit
Right.
assessments and that type of
Totally
stuff. Like
embedded in your
we do that.
lessons.
Yeah.
Yes.
So and then the state tests and the like No Child Left Behind stuff, that is like once a year in different grade levels. So what
Yes.
does this like middle management sort of testing look like if you have your kid in a school and you're a little bit worried about like there's so much testing going on? How does somebody differentiate between what is just like benchmark for the teacher, like on the fly type stuff, and what is district level
That's a great
requirements?
question. That's a great question because I'm going to be honest. I think it's going to be hard for a lot of parents to parse that out,
Mm-hmm.
because the way that a lot of the kind of system wide local assessments are rolled out is that they're supposed to be embedding it in their instructions somehow.
Mm-hmm.
They might be using it for like their group, the team of teachers to compare data, but that could also be a classroom level teacher created tool too.
Right.
Um, but it's when it's more about the frequency. So the local level assessments are typically going to be given like every quarter or so.
Okay.
And we have kind of a big event around it, and there's a little bit more pressure placed on it than you would have on like a classroom level test that's just that class. It's just that grade level. It's just, it's just that teacher, right? They're like, don't
Mm-hmm.
forget, it's our spelling test on Friday, right? That's a different kind of messaging than a school wide messaging of don't forget, it's the benchmark testing
Mm-hmm.
for fall benchmarks, do your and then they start doing like school wide things like don't forget to eat breakfast, it's important to test well, and then they start like ramping up,
Mm-hmm.
and they're like, oh, this is important and this will make decisions, and then that's what the messaging that the kids are getting, right? So they're
Mm-hmm.
getting amped up already, and the more, right, we kind of put like hype it up, let's get them
Mm-hmm.
excited, it amplifies the stress, okay?
Right.
And then so that might help, some people tease out what they're seeing. They should talk to their teachers of what they're seeing if they're in that kind of environment. But like I said, in a homeschool environment, you're not dealing with those as much because they are for systems, like local systems level information, and that's not useful as a homeschool parent, right?
Right.
But that's those local assessments level, and I'm going to differentiate from that to the statewide assessments, okay? And people talk about like NCLB. That's when they were required by the federal level. But the testing at the state level preceded the NCLB by many decades. Okay, so before I go much further into like NCLB and yeah, and the ratified as Every Student Succeeds Act, right? It's important to know that the Constitution left education to the states. Education was, and I'm sure you've talked about this a bunch of times, but
Yeah.
but
but it always bears repeating. So go for it.
Yeah, it's a power of the states, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of states had some sort of data collection across the
Mm-hmm.
state on student academic performance before No Child Left Behind tried to standardize it across the nation.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why it was important to do, and this is not a popular opinion, I know, but let me tell you why it was important to do, is that what it did is it placed an expectation on the technical quality of the assessments that were being used across the states.
Okay.
Because there were big differences in how they were constructed, how results were being calculated, how students were being included. And it made it, no, you've got to meet certain expectations of technical quality for it to be considered an appropriate statewide assessment. And so it really, it pushed the industry to be more diligent. And the way that is enforced is when a new statewide test is adopted in a state, they have to provide all of the technical information of how the test was built and how it performs. And this is all very, specialized statistics reports. These are, and these reports are thousands of pages, and I'm not exaggerating because I've been a reviewer for the U.S. Department of Ed. These reports go to the U.S. Department of Ed to say, hey, here's all the evidence of our technical quality and all of the different aspects that have to meet the industry standard, okay? And then they have people from within the country who are experts in the field to review those submissions and provide feedback. And it's talked about, it's called peer review in the industry, and it's talked about like this big scary thing, but it's really about helping the states to make sure that they are producing the most technically rigorous and quality assessment that they can. And the reason why this is important is because that's only the tests at once a year in grades 3 through 8 and once in high school for English language arts and mathematics, and science once in elementary, once in middle, and once in high school. That's it. And the intention of these tests are intended purely to be for systems information. Are the students in the aggregate, not individual, but are the students in the aggregate getting exposure to the content they're supposed to be at that grade level? That's the intention. It's supposed to be informing the adults on system health so that there can be things identified like, hey, these schools here or this district here is struggling. Let's give them more resources. That's the intention. But what it's been turned into, and I think this goes to your points.
Yeah, this is so. Thank you for explaining the background of the why, because that was like, I'm not in the assessment field, and I just know that, not derogatory towards you, I love you. The bean counters came in, tried to tell us what to do in the classrooms, and then the district didn't understand what they were supposed to be doing, so they're down our throats, and we have to take 3 weeks of instructional time out of our curriculum because nobody knows what they're doing, and the other tests are coming.
It defeats
like winter's
purpose.
Coming, we have to stop everything and get ready for the test, like, and
Right,
you know
and
that's how it's used too. And
I've seen wild practices that
the application of these things. So data gathering itself is not an issue. And I've said this, so I've done a couple of episodes about the Federal Department of Education where I've mentioned them, and like their original charter was to collect data and see how different states are doing against each other, essentially, and like the establishment of it and all that stuff. And then my issue is,
but can I clarify something though?
Yeah, go right ahead.
The National Assessment for Educational Progress
Mm-hmm.
is truly the only fair cross-state comparison tool we have.
Yeah, I'll give you that.
Period. Like the state tests they are unique. Even the state tests that kind of share tests, right?
Yeah.
And there's some states that share. They are so unique to the standards adopted by that state that
Mm-hmm.
it's not a fair comparison. They also place their cut scores a little different often, even
Mm-hmm.
if they share items or design.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the NAEP is really the only national measure for
Mm-hmm.
that purpose, and their methods are totally different than what you see at the state level.
Mm-hmm.
And when we talk about high stakes testing and the perceptions of what is high stakes, I associate that with what causes a lot of stress for everybody on the campus, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it's used in a weaponized manner
Yes.
against the adults and the students in
Yeah.
this situation, right?
Yep.
That's not just state tests. The local tests are high stakes. They're making decisions on class placement, course placement, right? That's high
Yeah.
stakes. That'll change the trajectory for a student's experience in a
Mm-hmm.
system. That's high stakes too. So how the results are being used is really what determines something that's high stakes. That said, the NAEP assessment is used for that comparison of trying to
Mm-hmm.
see what's happening across the states. And they are so careful about how their footprint is on the schools that do take the test.
Mm-hmm.
And it's random sampling. And they are constantly trying to mitigate the impact on the instructional time across
Mm-hmm.
the country for the NAEP to get just enough data to where they can maintain their mission,
Mm-hmm.
but not overly impact the schools as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's still a burden, don't get me wrong. It's still a burden, but the approach, the way it is, the way the school sites prepare for it
It's a lot
is,
more relaxed
oh, it's
usually.
super relaxed.
Yeah, it's
Like,
like, oh, it's just the NAEP test. Don't worry about it. Just do your best. And
exactly.
then the
That's
rest
how
of
we should be about the
them,
state tests.
the rest of them are like, our entire lives depend on you doing well on this.
Yeah.
And that's my problem
Yeah. Me
with
too.
it.
That's my problem.
And that's why I was like, when we first met, I was like, I don't know where this is going to go. And then you started talking, and I was like, oh, I think we mean the same thing. I just didn't know how to say it in the right way.
We absolutely do. We absolutely do. I have to say, one of the things I had mentioned earlier is that, becoming a parent after having all this knowledge has
Mm-hmm.
been such an eye opener. Because when my stepson was in fifth grade, he came home one day and was like, I'm going to take the most important test in my life next week. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
what are you talking about? I knew what he was talking about. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
why do you say that? And he told me about how if that's what his teacher really said, or this is just how he heard it. I don't know. But
Yeah.
he heard that how he did on these tests, and he was talking about the statewide tests in fifth grade would determine whether or not he got an elective in junior high. Now, that was not the intention for these tools. That was not the people who
Yeah.
wrote that fifth grade test. They were trying to ensure they were measuring properly whether or not the students in that grade level across the state were getting access to fifth grade curriculum and
Mm-hmm.
content. That does
Yep.
not determine their trajectory, their ability to learn. That doesn't tell you anything about their future or their likes or their talents or their other kinds of intelligences, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that where we'd be fostering those kinds of things, like electives and things like that. So
Mm-hmm.
so that was a very frustrating conversation for
Mm-hmm.
me, not with him so much as with what he was being told. And I think it was a really good example of how we've got things so backwards,
Mm-hmm.
so backwards.
For
And
sure. And even
and
if
it could be
that's not
better.
what his teacher actually said,
Mhm.
that was
That's
his
how he heard it.
understanding of what was
Yeah,
said.
exactly.
And that's what's important because you know as well as I do, if you go to a teacher, she's going to be like, I said this, this, or this. But that's fine if you didn't say those exact words, but that was the understanding of your audience of what you
Yes.
said.
Yes.
So take the critique, fix it. If your goal is to not induce that sort of like anxiety.
Mhm.
Because I think a lot of I don't know. I have very mixed feelings about things sometimes, and this is one of them. Like, I don't think that most admin is intentionally trying to cause issues whenever they're like
I
hyping
agree.
up for the test. I think
Yeah.
they're trying to be like pep rally kind of thing, and they don't realize that the actual end result of that causes an like you've seen the research, I'm sure, where there's like the report of anxiety, the
Hmm.
self-reporting of anxiety increases around state testing.
Yes.
It goes through the friggin' roof as soon as they start announcing that state testing's coming.
Yeah.
And the farther out that they announce it and start building it up, their the district's enthusiasm, I think is how they try to put it, for doing well. If you look at the graph of like how often they do announcements and like how hyped up they get, that directly, like, it's an exact like
It
mirror
correlates.
of
It
the
it correlates with higher anxiety amongst the
yeah.
students.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
you can
Because
say it's smart. I don't, you know what I'm trying to say. Go ahead,
I
say
do,
it smart.
and it does show up. There's been a variety of research studies that have looked at that, and there is a correlation, absolutely. And before we, start like, throwing stones at, like at this is what
Mhm.
this is the system we have incentivized.
Mhm.
This has been incentivized by policies at states, particularly like not all state does this, but many states do use these scores to inform some of their well, it's definitely used for funding. Okay, that is actually a part of the role of this data collection, is to
Yeah.
make sure that schools who are struggling in delivering curriculum at grade level, as evidenced by student performance,
Mhm.
are able to get the additional supports they need to help bring those kids up to grade level. Okay.
Mhm.
That's very different than some states that do use it as like they incentivize it as a part of teacher pay.
Mhm. You get bonuses
Um,
if your class does like gets a certain percentile.
yeah, and
Mhm.
there's a lot of mixed. That's not what they're intended to
Yeah.
be used for, and it's highly problematic because there's so many different variables that go into a student's performance,
Mhm.
um, that the teacher is only a portion of it during that one school year, because there's all the other foundational knowledge that comes up. Because right, we're starting in
Yep.
third grade. That's when you start. That's baseline, right, for these
Right.
statewide tests, right? So you're not looking at that third grade teacher's performance. This is a culmination of all of the teachers that kiddo experienced up until that point in their
Mhm.
life, right? Plus what they've experienced at home and in life. And that doesn't mean that that was all in one school. We have a highly mobile student population across this country.
Mhm.
And so, we could be talking about 10 teachers over a child's educational experience, right?
Mhm.
So we're putting it at the foot of that third grade teacher. I have some real problems with that as an assessment specialist, because that tool was not designed for that. So
Mhm.
we've created this system of incentivizing very strange behavior because of one big fallacy. Katie, I'm going to drop an idea on you.
Please do.
Okay. All right. Here's the idea. He's this guy named Goodhart. He was an economist, and he put forth this idea that when a measure replaces the goal, how we're measuring the goal, when that measure replaces the goal, it's no longer a good measure. So
What?
our goal, right? Okay.
When
So
when something gets bastardized, we should get rid of it.
it's no longer a good measure, right?
Mhm.
Okay. So what have we incentivized, right? The goal here was student learning.
Mhm.
That's the goal, right? And we're measuring student learning through this limited set of tests. It's only 3 subjects, certain grades, and science is only 3 times in a student's whole
Mhm.
K-12 experience, right? Okay, this is a very limited set of data collections. That's why you see states adding through their own legislation additional tests. Some
Mhm.
states have history, social science tests. Some states have additional science tests because they're like end of course. So
Mhm.
they all have to have a end of biology course test, for
Mhm.
example, or um, So like there are states that have more than this, right? They're starting to reach down into K1 and 2 as
Mm-hmm.
well with state legislation across the, different states are kind of looking at this in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but this very limited set of tests to measure academic performance, right?
Mm-hmm.
To try to get an idea of in a sampling of the goal, which was students learning.
Right.
But now what we've done is we've made the test results the goal. And that changes what we do as people. And that's what
Right.
Goodhart was pointing out as an economist, is that people's behavior will change when the goal is replaced by the measure.
Mm-hmm.
So we have this strange, like testing focus behavior
Mm-hmm.
that really negates and undermines what assessment looks like as a process. And so the adults in the situation, their anxiety goes up because now their career performance, right? Their performance in their career is being judged off of this new goal of test
Mm-hmm.
scores. That anxiety and stress and pressure that's felt at the district level, I know I've been there. I've been in that, and you don't always know what is going to influence the scores. Then that gets passed on to the teachers who have their own anxiety and stress about it.
Mm-hmm.
No wonder the kids are experiencing this. No wonder the students are expressing the stress and worry and anxiety. And what does that ultimately do to their performance? How can they demonstrate what they know if they're stressed out?
Right.
Right? So,
And cinnamon
going,
rolls for breakfast on test day is not the way to get them to chill out. I'm just throwing I'm just throwing that out there.
I have something to say about that. Like, okay,
Sure
there's
you do.
rallies, like treats and stuff. I get it. You're trying to incentivize the kids, but what you are
Mm-hmm.
doing with that behavior, adults in the situation, please listen to what I'm saying. When you incentivize behavior like this, you are negating the value of learning that happened every day before that.
Amen.
And so what we need to be incentivizing is learning and instruction. I mean, you're probably gonna
Don't be
hear
silly,
me.
Mary.
I
Why
know.
would we want to do that in schools? Oh
I'm
my
an
God, don't be silly.
assessment specialist. I'm talking about instruction, right? Um, it's not killing the kids with test prep that is isolated from real authentic learning.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that said, they should be oriented to the platform, like whatever they're going to take the test, however they're going to take the test, they should
Mm-hmm.
understand it. They should have exposure to it. But that's a group activity, that's a hey, let's open up this practice test and experience it together. What do you see? Hey, what does this button do? What does
Mm-hmm.
this look like? See how like already we're just playing with it?
Yeah.
That changes things, right? This is an opportunity for them to demonstrate what they know and can do. You're going to do your best. And you know what? I'm not going to be able to help you because I can't give you an unfair advantage.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It wouldn't be fair if I helped you get your answer. So I'm going to say, hey, do your best. Okay. But I've been helping you since the first day of school.
Mm-hmm.
Now this is a different, right? Oh, we're kind of flipping the
Changing
script
that
a little bit.
mentality a little bit.
Yes. And that also puts way more importance on the classroom level assessments
Mm-hmm.
and that relationship that the teacher can build with the students through the year of trust. When I say this is what the results are used for and this is what it does,
Mm-hmm.
then they can trust that that's going to be true.
Right.
So a lot of people just don't even know how the results are being used. And
Yeah.
and I've seen the strangest uses happening at the local level, unfortunately. The state has very specific uses of what
Mm-hmm.
they can and cannot do and what they can and cannot report.
Mm-hmm.
It is very restrictive, mostly codified in either law or some sort of administrative rules or
Mm-hmm.
policy. But, in efforts to try to make a difference, to show they're making efforts and trying to get the new goal, which is higher test scores, we're incentivizing very odd and not valid uses of the results, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's any way I can help people and not do that, that's what I'm going to do. Now,
Mm-hmm.
we've been talking about schools a lot lately, okay? And I want to make sure that your homeschool people get something valuable out of this.
Yeah, because especially state testing, excuse me. I know that at least my local states, every state has their own regulations in regard
Yes.
to education in general, but especially homeschooling. It
Yes.
varies from literally you just tell the school that you're doing it and then there is no further oversight to you're essentially having required to do classroom like traditional school, but you get to do it at home instead of in the school building with other people. Very vastly different regulations. But as far as I know, there's only a couple of states that do not require homeschoolers to participate in the third, what is it, third, fifth, eighth, and 11th or something like that,
Um,
typically.
it's so every state's a little different. What every state is
Mm-hmm.
required to have by federal laws, third through eighth, and once in high school for ELA
Okay.
and math, and then once in elementary, once in middle, once in high school for science. Now,
Okay. So
but
I know in Ohio they only require, because I live in Ohio,
yeah,
they only require us to do the third grade test for that set of testing, and then you don't have to test again. I think until like eighth or 10th grade or something like that.
okay, yeah. Every state is so different. So,
Yeah.
so this is when this is the first thing I would say everybody really needs to do is go directly to the state resources
Mm-hmm.
in your state and navigate the websites. And I know that's not always an easy task. It's a government website. And I mean, when I worked in government, we'd laugh about how like we were trying to make it better, but it's so much information and it's,
I don't know what you're talking about. Government is so efficient at everything.
well, websites are kind of hard anyway, just because when you have so much information,
Mm-hmm.
there's only so many logic trees, So
Yeah.
So definitely I would that's the first place I would go is get the information from the state
Mm-hmm.
because then you will understand better what is state and then what's local.
Mm-hmm.
Because depending upon your homeschool arrangement, if you're homeschooling underneath, say, a charter, right, or
Mm-hmm.
you have a different kind of agreement, right, that they're going to have local requirements that are required of those homeschool families to maintain their own certification and accreditation of their school. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I say go to the state first, because one, every state's different. Some states allow students to opt out. Like well, not students, but they have to be.
Yeah.
It's the
The
parents,
families.
right?
Yeah.
The family can opt their child out, right? So some states allow that, some states don't.
Mm-hmm.
So go to the state first, and then go to your specific local organization, whether it's a charter, whether it's a public school system, right? There's like public charters that sponsor homeschool,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's
There's a ton of those in Ohio, dude.
oh, okay, yeah, it's common here
So
too.
many. And in Pennsylvania
It's
too,
common in
because I live right on the
California
border.
too.
So
So depending on where you are, then you can parse out, okay, what's a state requirement and what's a local requirement. And I'm going to tell you right now, I have been working in this industry since I started back in 2005. That was my first year in a classroom, okay? And I tell you to do it in this order because a lot of people who are working in schools and districts, for no fault of their own, this is not an indictment, but they just know how things are done. And they don't necessarily know what is a state requirement and what's a local requirement.
mm-hmm.
Okay, some people will know, but some people won't. And so that's why I'm saying go to the state sources first, understand what the state requirements are, and then you can see what is added over and above the state requirements for your local area and how your homeschool arrangement is. So you understand what the requirements are and what your options are, because you have options, okay? Now, if you want your child to test, there are some benefits. And if it's an option where you don't have to do it, then you should look at both sides of it and see what's right for your child. But if you do decide to test, I'll say some of the pros, okay, would be that if it is required and it's a part of the accreditation of the entity that is protecting your right to homeschool, you want your students' academic performance to be included in that information.
Right.
This is about visibility, right? And it's about informing the system,
Mm-hmm.
okay? And if you don't, if they don't take the test out, don't take, pair them. There's a whole bunch of other stuff you're going to do, but there is a certain amount of value in making sure that your child's included in the data. So it is a representative sample of the homeschooling families, a part of that organization. That's going to help that organization continue to sponsor homeschooling at a systems level. I'm talking systems, right? The other thing is that as a parent, it gives you some contextual information, not a judgment, not a final determination, but contextual information of where your child is in relation to other children in the state on that one metric. A sampling of English language arts, a sampling of mathematics on grade level, right? That's it. That can be helpful, though, as a validation tool for what you're doing.
Because that's something a lot of homeschoolers struggle with, especially like first generation homeschool moms. They struggle a lot with, if I don't buy the really expensive curriculums, then how am I going to know that my kid's on grade level? How am I going to know that they're keeping track, that they're keeping pace with their school aged peers? And that's a whole different discussion that we can have at another day. But so they either go and they don't think that they can afford to homeschool because they don't understand what their assessment options are to make sure that they are comfortable in their own abilities to teach their kids. Or they go in the complete opposite direction and you end up with the, like, gives us a bad rap feral homeschoolers. Like, feral homeschooling isn't necessarily a bad thing as long as there's like parameters for it.
Well, I'm gonna tell you though, I've been a remote employee since 2017, pre-COVID remote, and I'm feral. Like, I can't go back to an office. Like,
but
so,
like the ones that are just like, you don't have to teach reading, you don't have to teach writing, you don't have to teach them like anything in a what we would consider like a traditional academic format, like that type of stuff. That's what I'm talking about. Like, it used to be called unschooling, but unschooling is like something different now.
It's a little different,
So it's just kind of like the ones that don't really have any sort of structure and are like hands-off parents, but they don't want their kids to be in the system either. So there's kind of those two ways that first generation parents can go. And then there's that like middle lane of people that do their own research and try really hard to provide something a little bit different for their student. And a lot of parents will start off with the expensive curriculums and then they transition into a more individualized system once they come into their own and are validated in some way that they are able to keep pace with their kid, with their age grouped peers. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, and ultimately, like, that's what this tool, what the statewide tests are designed for.
Plus, it gives us bragging rights because homeschoolers consistently test way higher.
That's why I'm saying they should be seen. It validates the practice, and there's so much value to making sure that what data is being collected, like, is consistently collected, because at the end of the day, there's going to be decisions made at the state level to continue or not continue funding programs, and if they don't have data, how are they going to make a decision that's going to benefit those people they can't see?
Absolutely.
Right. So that's the big pro that I see.
That's a great pro.
For homeschool
that's like
parents.
15 pros in one.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's how I see it. And after being in a state department, like this is how it's looked at in an aggregate. It's not the individual kiddo, right? Because we only have so much reliability on the individual level. So that said, okay, there's also there are always resources that states try to put out to try to help you understand what the scores mean and what they don't mean.
Those are so confusing. They're so jargon laden.
I know. And
like, I'm a professional educator. Like, I am a classically trained educator. I know how to make tests. I know how to help make standardized tests. I wasn't good at standardized tests until I learned how to make them. Like, I didn't understand them.
That's a real talk right there.
Like, legit. No one does well on them. And to become a teacher, you have to take a standardized test to get your certification to become a teacher.
Yes. Well, and actually, you just brought up another, like, pro, actually, is that your kids aren't going to get around testing. They're going to have to take standardized tests in their life. If they want a driver's license, that is a standardized test. Okay.
Good point.
Like, I'm not just talking about like SAT, ACT, and all that's a whole other podcast. But I'm not just talking about that. But certification tests, I took a test to be certified as a professional project manager because I needed more letters after my name. No, it's not that. It was very valuable information and it was worth it. But they're not going to get away from doing tests as a person. Okay.
Right. Like, even if they want to go into a blue collar job, especially blue collar jobs. Oh my God.
Especially certifications. Like, absolutely.
Welders. My dad's a welder and Mastercraft by trade. So like he has to take Mastercrafts have to do 5 certifications. And it's electrician, machinist, plumbers, welders, anything. Anything that has to do with building codes, becoming a building inspector, all of those things. Yes. They all come with standardized tests to get the certification so that you can make a living doing it.
Yes.
So making sure that your homeschooler can take a test and knows how to do it efficiently and effectively, you're right. That's very important to get around in our society and the way it's set up.
They want to become a beautician. They want to, they want to, like my husband's certified for air conditioning and air compressors and stuff like that, right? Like, so yeah, I understand. Yeah. So there is value there. Okay. So I think that's kind of covers the pros. Okay. The cons to taking the state test, if you have the option, to not do it. If there is undue stress around this event, then I don't think you should put your kid through it. And what I mean by that is I don't know the experience of how the kids experience the tests, how that will be for you in your local school area. And some schools, the way they treat the homeschool students is not okay.
It's
and
not.
If it adds anxiety to this whole experience, it's not worth it. It's not worth it because you're not going to get good results.
Not necessarily the school district even. Like the school district just like looks at our parents and side eyes them. But like as a second generation homeschool mom, like the students themselves are nasty to homeschoolers that show up for like public events a lot of times.
Well, and it's on that local, like the school level, right?
Yeah.
How they're brought into the space, how they're set up for the testing experience. I've seen it done really, really well in some schools, and I've seen some really terrible practices. But I gotta admit, those terrible practices are being used with the enrolled students too. So it's not just the homeschool kids. I've seen kids take a standardized test in the hallway outside of an administrator's office in the main office with people with discipline issues, parents coming in and out. It was chaos.
How is that even possible to take a test like that? Like it's literally not. Have the administrator sit there and try and do it. You know they can't do it. And then you're expecting a kid to be able to do that who doesn't have the emotional or mental maturity to be able to handle that kind of chaos in the first place.
Yeah, it's not reasonable to expect a human to do their best in focusing on a task in that kind of environment. That's why it's not that was a breach of security. This was so outside of an acceptable environment for this kid, right? But so if you're looking at a situation where, you as you're interacting with your local school, that is where you'd be testing, where your child be testing, and you can ask about, well, how is it set up? This isn't about, it's about understanding, right? And honestly, if you are a parent that has kids in regular school, I think you should be asking, how do you set this up? How do you get the kids onto the computer or with the booklets, depending on how it's
Hmm.
given, right? Like, how long are they going to be testing for? A lot of these tests now don't have a time limit.
Okay.
That does not mean they should be taking that test all day. That is not what that means. That means that you can break it up into these short testing times.
You
Like,
mean they
so
shouldn't be sitting there for 2 4-hour stints for 4 days in a row?
no, no.
What?
I have literally told, okay, this is,
You know that's how it's done around here sometimes. Like there are a couple of school districts that do a really good job, and I'm really lucky that I live in a place where you can pick like we have school we have open enrollment in Ohio. So you can pick where your kids goes in general, but if you're a homeschooler and you're sending your kid to get tested, you're not doing it yourself. We do have the option to self-test here,
mm.
which is awesome because then you control the environment that your kid is exposed to for the testing.
Which, by the way, is the best way to do it because you want to replicate as best as possible. There are some restrictions, right?
Mhm.
Because you can't have all the resources to
Right.
maintain security and all that stuff, so they don't have an unfair advantage. But you should replicate. They should be in as close to their comfortable instructional environment as possible. So like that's awesome, right? Like
Yeah.
Ohio, like honestly, a little shout out to the Department of Education, Ohio, because like
We do have
there's
a
some
pretty
good
decent.
people there. There's some
Yeah.
really good people there. So,
Yeah. We're pretty decent here in Ohio. That's actually like I was not born and raised in Ohio. I was born and raised in Pennsylvania and we chose to become Ohioans for a lot of reasons. And the educational the additional educational freedom because my husband and I knew that we were going to want to homeschool eventually
mm,
whenever we had children. That was actually one of the things that we took into consideration when we decided to become Ohioans. Um, but even if you're sending your kid to the testing center to the local school or whatever to have them tested, you can opt into whichever school you want to send them to for that testing experience. So like any of your local schools. So you can actually like school shop to see which one's going to be the best environment for your student to take that
wow.
test in.
I don't know. There's going to be some questions being sent out to you for how you do it in Ohio from other states, because I know that is not an option in a lot of other states.
I know we're really, really blessed here. There are of course there are of course things that I'm like that's super sus and sketch, but um, I mean it's a government agency, so of course
Well,
there's
and
always going to be some.
yeah, and they're making choices that are benefiting to people in the like really the way policies are supposed to be done. And in
Hmm.
my philosophy is, there is a point where they have to benefit as many people as possible, but there
Hmm.
is going to be a time where that's not going to be you.
Yeah.
And that's the limitation of making choices that impact so many people with these choices, right?
Right.
um but yeah, I think we went through like the pros and cons. The other con that I would name though is just something to be aware of
Hmm.
though. And this is true for anyone, and this is more of a parents should know that it is not always, it's not the end all be all measure of your child's ability. Okay.
Yep.
So if these scores are being used, so let's say you have an elementary student, right, that has been homeschooled up to like fifth grade, right, and then you're transitioning in secondary
Hmm.
to an in-person, and if they are basing the child's classes solely on test scores, I encourage you insist on other considerations to be included in deciding the child's course placement,
Hmm.
because the test only measures that student's as a sampling, and it's one moment in their time, right? I mean, they
Hmm.
might have sat over a series a few days or a day or whatever, but
Hmm.
it's still just a snapshot with kind of a limited view,
Hmm.
because it can't measure all of your child's abilities even in that subject.
Right.
It's designed to look at the group of students for system levels. So on the individual level, there are some things to look at. Like where were they in the performance level, and if they're right by a border, start looking at some of the other things. There might be this thing called a standard error of measure,
Mm-hmm.
which means that if they took that test over and over and over and over again without any memory, they might score anywhere in that range.
Mm-hmm.
And if that range falls over, like their score was below the proficiency line, but that standard error of measure, that band goes above the proficiency line.
Mm-hmm.
As an assessment specialist, that could be proficient.
Mm-hmm.
That's what that means. And so if they're saying, well, they're not proficient, so they don't get into this class, but you know that your child has an aptitude for reading or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they're keeping them out of maybe the higher level English language arts class,
Mm-hmm.
and they're passionate about writing and they love to read. They just didn't do quite so well in that test. Do not let that be the only measure that is factored in. Bring in writing samples from your child
Mm-hmm.
as another source of evidence of this is what my child can do.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not a con so much as a warning. And I implore that you guys really accept and know that it's just a snapshot, and it's not designed to determine the fate of your child. There's nothing that says that they could tank third grade and then be off the charts in fourth grade.
Right.
I see it all the time because kids don't learn in this, like, I'm on grade level now, and then I'm on, they don't learn.
I don't know what you're talking about, Mary. All of the standardized tests tell me that every single kid matures and absorbs information at the exact same rate, at the exact same time, at the exact same age. Come on, Mary.
That's not what we're saying. We're saying averages. This is an average of a group, right? It's not the individual performance.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just I think there's a lot of measurement kind of ideas and statistical concepts that really need to be demystified. And it makes it a lot less scary, because it is, these tests can't say all of these things. It just doesn't. So, I hope that helps put the test in its place, because they are limited. It can only measure what it can measure,
So I have a question for you. You did a great job explaining that, because that's something that we as educators know, the limitations of every type of test that we can give. And we know that they're just benchmark markers, essentially, for what we're going to do next with that student, is how we're supposed to use them on like a classroom basis.
Particularly on the classroom, right? The classroom level, and some of that local stuff you can use that way. The statewide ones, you can really only use it to say, like, there's this pattern and I could do better in, this kind quadratic formulas. I'm a math teacher, right? And go, okay, so they didn't do so great in quadratic formulas. So this coming year, I'm gonna work in quadratic formulas this way, this way, this way, and this way. That's what it's good for. It's systems level, right? High level, big level, right? So there is still some ways to use these large scale statewide tests for instructional planning for the group, but not necessarily for individual students, because that data is like one snapshot at spring, and that doesn't capture their learning to the end of the year. And then you have the summer, and now they come back, right? So it really only gives you one measure from that point. And then the first couple weeks, maybe, you can make some individual level decisions on, like, some choices that you're making, maybe some small group work, but your classroom assessments after that first couple weeks should be replacing your information about where your kiddos are, because that old statewide test, it's old, it's stale now, right? You can make those big kind of through year decisions of, I'm going to emphasize this skill more. I'm going to shift the way I'm pacing this, and so I can spend more time through these, with these concepts. That's useful. But on the individual student decision level, it's stale. It's one measure. So, so those classroom level assessments, that should be informing what you're doing in a day in and day out process. Yeah.
Right. So if we're talking about, okay, so homeschoolers are different. when it comes to testing, they're kind of a different beast. If so, let's talk to the public school parents or the private school parents. The you send your kid to a building and they get educated by someone else's parents. When they're getting into testing season, everybody knows letters get sent out, emails and text messages get sent out. I'm pretty sure they put up a bat signal in some places. Like, everybody knows it's testing season, right? So, what are some things that, couple question. Okay, this is a leveled question, okay?
Okay. All right.
So, first off, what are some things that parents can look at kind of whenever they see their students starting to amp up a little bit or talking about testing and stuff like that? So they'll see signs coming from their student about what's going on in school. What are some things that parents can do to help their student sort of through that process and make it as stress-free as possible on their end? And then on a sort of like institutional level, if they have an inclination that, like, if their kids are coming saying that it's the most important test of their life, right? That's an inclination that that there's a systemic issue with the way that those tests are being used and that they're not being used properly, as we've discussed earlier in this episode, right? So what can the parent, like, what's the next step action? What's some actionable steps that parents can take? Because that's one of the things that I always try to do on this podcast is give parents and community members actionable steps that they can take for reform if they see these things going on. Because some districts are banging, man. Some districts are amazing at things. I have never completely denounced public education. It has its place. There are absolutely fabulous teachers that are sticking it out. God bless them. They're doing the Lord's work. But like, it needs reform and teachers need help because a lot of times they cannot step up and talk because of the teachers unions and the backlash that'll happen. They'll lose their jobs. We've all seen it. Like, that happens. And they can't speak up. So if you see something happening, what kind of steps can you take sort of from the outside community level to get in contact with those educators or the district and kind of talk about that? And does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And they're two wildly different questions. So
sorry.
Let's go. No, totally good. Totally good. So for the first question, right? You're seeing your child come home and they're, like my fifth grader when he came home years ago and he was like, this is the most important test. So the first thing I would do, and I did do as a parent, was to get as much understanding of where my child actually was in relationship to this task that he was going or she's going to experience. Okay. And the reason why that's important is because sometimes they'll come back with this messaging and then you dig a little deeper and they're like, yeah, but I don't care. Okay. Or you dig a little deeper and you find out they do care. They care a lot and they have already made up their mind on certain things. For example, I have a little story of why doing this digging is really important. My nephew, when he was in elementary school, came home and said, "Oh, we're gonna take the most important test." Da, 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 da. Okay, and this is a while ago. And what we found out afterwards, when the scores came back, and his mother, my sister, was like, it's like the worst. Did you try to get every single question wrong?
Yeah,
like they're flagging you for like interventions and all this stuff, right? Like there's like, wait a second, they're like asking for teacher parent conference, like all this stuff is like, because they were worried about what classes they were going to put them the next year, which I had, I flipped out about that. But
yeah.
So we talked to my nephew and it turns out that he was told that they were very, very important tests. And he hated his teacher so bad that year, tanked it on purpose. Because she said, it's very important. This reflects on me. This reflects on the school. And he's like, oh, yeah, it reflects on you. Okay. And he made up his mind. Okay. So do a little digging. Like a big important test. Yeah, but what does that mean to you? Right.
Yeah.
And then you can actually like kind of suss out like, well, if you are stressed about it, what's going to cause that stress? And then you can reassure them of, this is not the end all be all. This is not something that determines your abilities or your future opportunities. Oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
Because what we have done as a society is mistake correlation for causation. Okay.
Yes.
We have totally and completely mistaken that if a child scores lowly in these low grades, that they're going to end up in prison.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's not what that means. Correlation, it just means things happen, statistically you'll see things happening together, but that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that they have a relationship with each other. Typically they have a relationship with some other variable we're not measuring.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They're correlated, but one doesn't cause the other. There's something else that's
Mm-hmm.
causing both of them.
So,
Okay?
like the third grade reading level and the incarceration rate,
That's a
that kind of
correlation.
correlation, but it's not direct causation. But they I cannot tell you how many parents I've run into that have like third graders that are getting ready to take the test, that like, well, this percentage of students that didn't pass their third grade reading test ends up in prison.
I've heard it too. I've
And
heard it too.
it
I've tried to dispel it every
incenses
chance I
me.
get. It's
Like
it's
it,
just false.
yeah. Like,
That's you're doing silly things with numbers, right?
yeah.
The
Silly
they
things with numbers. I love that.
That's what it is. Because you know what, you guys, here's the deal. The statistics don't lie, it's people that do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Right? And this is a form of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is there some relationship between these numbers? Yes, we can measure it.
Mm-hmm.
Is it because one influences the other? No, it's because there's another variable or set of variables that
Mm-hmm.
are influencing all of these things.
I
And number
actually
one
talked about
thing,
that in
number
one of the episodes about
oh,
there is a correlation, but we need to start looking at the family structure and everything of these people as well. Because
stability.
sorry to cut you off, but
No,
like
we're going the same place, Katie.
yeah,
This is why
because and that's why I talk so much in like articles and here on the podcast for One Room Education, because the family structure is the basis of all education that can happen. And if that is awry, if it's a fatherless home, if it's a grandma taking care of her grandkids, if there's anything sort of outside of the mom and dad sort of norm, or if there's like drug abuse or alcohol abuse or any of the things that can cause turmoil within the home, it makes that kid's foundation like sand, and they don't feel stable anywhere except for like maybe one classroom in their entire lives. And they end up dropping out of
and that's
school,
fleeting,
and
right?
they
And
test
that's
lower on the
fleeting.
third grade test because obviously they're going to.
Yeah, it's
Like,
all about stability. Katie, I can't agree with you more. It's about stability.
mhm,
What stability looks like can be vastly different from home to home to home.
mhm.
We're seeing more and more multi-generational families in our country right now, and I think that's a good thing.
I love that so
Yeah,
much.
like I'm seeing it in new builds in our area, right, where this kind of multi-generational suites and things like that to
Hmm.
really facilitate this. I do believe, and in all fairness, my academic background before I became a teacher was anthropology, so I studied different cultures,
Yeah.
and I do think that that is a beautiful development in our society, in that we're seeing more and more multi-generational homes.
Hmm.
Why we're seeing that is to be
That's a
discussed at
different
another
issue
time.
altogether.
But if it adds stability to the child's environment, it
Hmm.
will benefit the child. And so no, I couldn't agree with it. It's really measuring this idea of safety, stability, and whether or not their needs are being met in those
Hmm.
formative first 5 years.
Yeah.
And whether food, shelter, physical safety, emotional safety, right?
Hmm.
All of that is what intellectual learning stands upon as
Hmm.
for people, right? And so yeah, so like, yeah, okay, you're not at reading level at third grade, you're going to prison is like the most.
And it's the number one, like, it's like the number one cited reason that we have to test them. Oh my God, we have to test them so
Okay,
that we can get the prisons ready. Like,
no,
I don't.
Okay,
I don't
okay.
understand.
But you know what? You know what though? You know what else also is another metric to get the prisons ready is a population size. So how many babies are born this year? Because we know in 17 to 18 years we're going to need more prison cells if they have a population boom. Like we
Mm-hmm.
experienced a little baby boom post COVID.
I don't
We're
know
going to
what you're
have a
talking
little
about. My
spike.
kid's not almost 4. I'm married.
so so there so so when we talk about like correlation and causation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that would breaks my heart, honestly,
Yeah.
because like I have talked to so many parents over the years about what their scores mean. I have a good friend of mine who actually we became friends because she was really struggling with her son, and I told her, I said, what you're seeing, this is like classic signs of real dyslexia. And she was like, I know, I think so, and I don't know, and I just don't understand it. And so we talked about like what this means, and I gave her some ways to play through play,
Mm-hmm.
play-based instruction. Homeschool parents, come on, this
Girl.
is it, dude. Oh, I love it.
Woo!
Okay, so play-based assessment also exists.
That's what I do with my son. Everything is
Totally
play
perfect.
to see where he's at. Like he wrote mommy. Did I tell you? He wrote mommy and I didn't have to
With
tell him
his
how to spell
letters
it
or with his hand?
with his hand.
Oh, that's exciting.
I'm
Oh,
so
that's so
so
exciting.
but like we just play. Like
Yeah.
he has a tablet. I have to shout out this piece of educational equipment, okay? I'm pretty sure it's Leapfrog, but it's called Mr. Pencil, and our neighbor who is a retired special ed teacher and like admin and stuff got it for him for Christmas last year, I think. And it is write, read, spell, and draw. And it's just the little screen, and then it's got the keypad with all the numbers and the letters.
That's great.
And you can customize it with their name, so he knows how to spell his whole name. All three names. He knows how to like all the numbers. He can count. He can like all of this seriously. It's called Mr. Pencil. And if you have a kid that is like 2 to 5, I would get it. Hands down, the best thing. He became obsessed with this thing, and he can write now with this thing. Like I
Beautiful.
put my hand on top of his for the weight because his fine motor skills aren't quite there. But
Wait,
just with that little
he's
bit of
4,
weight,
right? He's 4.
he'll be 4 in December. Yeah,
Oh, he's not even 4. Oh yeah,
yeah,
he's great. He's doing great. Yeah,
yeah.
you're right. The fine motor skills are going to start developing in the next like 24 to 36 months because
Mm-hmm.
he's almost 4. And then so then he can move from like the pencils, like or the
Mm-hmm.
crayons, the thick crayons are really
Yeah.
great. Oh yeah, big chunky
I got
crayons,
really, I got
to the
these
more
like
smaller stuff.
my first pencil things, and they're like 2 or 3 times the
Hmm.
size of a regular pencil. They're really
Hmm.
awesome.
Hmm. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
it's perfect. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
So play
but
based.
yeah, it's
Yes, play based.
wonderful.
Yes, play based assessment happens. So that's why I talked to my friend about it, and I gave her some strategies around play based assessment to see how he perceives letters and numbers,
Yes.
and so when he was responding and they were interacting with the shapes, they came back inverted, they came back mirrored, they came
Mm-hmm.
right. And I was like, yeah, because his brain, and I had to explain the story. It's like what you're looking for is if he's thinking about these squiggles, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
that's what they are.
Right.
They're two-dimensional squiggles. If
Mm-hmm.
his brain is perceiving them in a three-dimensional space, and so he can take it and turn it around, and
Mm-hmm.
that's just he's perceiving it in a three-dimensional space, then that's something to look at, and that's why it's coming back flipping and
Mm-hmm.
turning and mirroring and stuff, because he's got it in three-dimensional space. So here's what you can do with it. And gosh, he's making so much progress now that she understood
Mm-hmm.
what's going on in the brain, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and then it gave her a language, because he kept getting asked at school things like, well, are they bouncing? Are the letters bouncing? And he'd be like,
Yeah.
no, they look funny. And his like,
Yeah. They don't have the language to be able to even
oh,
tell you what's the matter.
mm-mm,
Yeah.
mm-mm. But he could show it
Mm-hmm.
with blocks and things and drawings, and he could when they were playing, because it's low stress and he's able to express himself freely, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then she could see how his brain was taking these two-dimensional shapes, making them three-dimensional. And
Mm-hmm.
I was like, okay, so this is what we're working with. So there's some tools that I gave her around grounding the words. So a lot of text is floating
Mm-hmm.
in textbooks, right? There's no lines.
Yeah.
Um, the lines help a lot, and to
Mm-hmm.
isolate and ground the words,
Mm-hmm.
and talk about them like on a train track. And he loves trains.
That's awesome. That's one of the things I do with my kids. So with my tutoring students, I didn't realize it was like an actual thing. So I'll have them take like a notepad like this or just a
Yeah.
piece of paper. And I actually did this with my husband because of his traumatic brain injury. It manifests in kind of weird ways. So this is something I do because my eyes will jump around on a page if there's nothing. So I'll use my hand to slide down the page to cover up the rest of the words. But when I'm teaching people how to do it for the first time, I have them take something physical like this notepad or a piece of paper, or like we had a piece of cardboard that was from a hat that we just got. So that's what my husband's using to read out loud for my son. And he just uses that and just makes it go down the page, and it keeps him from losing his place and like skipping over and forgetting what he was doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a great tool for anyone. Like if you're tired, even if you don't struggle reading, if you're tired, it will help alleviate the processing that you're doing. For students who are learning and struggling to read, sometimes that you take it a step further and you cut out a rectangle in the cardboard, right? So when they move, it's also hiding the stuff right above and below, right? So that's another way of kind of isolating it. But once he started to conceptualize the letters, and kind of understand that the letters are sitting on a track like a train, and they have to keep going the same way because there's only one way, right? Then that took that two-dimensional thing and grounded it in a three-dimensional space. And so his sight word recognition's off the hook because he's seeing them as whole things. And so so it's been
That's
a really
really
wonderful thing to see, but these are real challenges that kids, as they're learning, can be internalized as, oh no, there's something wrong with me.
Right.
If we're not empowering them to learn and using the tools we have to help them learn, right? And
Right.
this is obviously where my heart is. And I absolutely believe this, and I know that as we use testing right now, it's being used not everywhere, right? But
Yeah.
the prevailing uses is really not using it as a tool for empowering students or adults who are teaching those students. It's being used as a weapon. And
Right.
so that breaks my heart. But
So what do we do about that?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to tell you, like, there isn't an easy answer, and I really wish there were. And we just wake everyone
Wrap it up in a bow and say, go forth and fix it, people.
Yeah. But because it's a mindset shift, and it is a very honest look at how adult actions influence the experience of the children that they're working with. And it doesn't start on the first day of testing season. It starts on the first day of school. And so as much as I and other people like me can share the information around assessment as a process, this is how it's a tool, this is how it can be used to motivate and to demonstrate to kids how they are progressing so they see the evidence of their learning. And then that's how it's a motivating tool, right? And being cognizant of the fact that whenever we weaponize any kind of assignment, whether it's a test, an essay, anything, right? Then what we're doing is we're giving the message to our kids that they may not be good enough. So it's a mindset shift, okay? That is going to take a lot of communication around what assessment as a process is. What does it look like in your classroom? Happening with the teachers, happening with the administrators as well, because I don't see the pressures of increasing test scores going away anytime soon.
No, unfortunately.
However, drilling and killing is not going to be the way that's going to do it. We're not seeing gains in test scores We know this isn't getting better, right? The politician's solution is to change the test because they don't like the numbers. They're going to change it. That clearly,
Mm-hmm.
that's the problem. We don't like the results, so we're going to change the measure. And now we have a total disruption to what practices are being taught in the classroom, how they're measuring things. You lose your longitudinal data, and they spend way more on testing than they need to, because every time a politician changes the test, it costs tax dollars. So any
That's one of the
politician,
things I've
oh,
always
this
been
drives me
trying to tell
crazy.
people is schools are a government entity. And
Yeah,
anytime something changes, where does that money come from?
yeah.
And if we are inefficient at what we're doing in a school, it's a very unique sort of high stakes environment in general, because if we screw up, that's a whole generation that's screwed. Like,
I mean, in that place, right?
yeah.
Like,
I
because
mean, the other places will deal with it, but like in general. And the politicians, because it's a government entity, the public schools and schools in general are a government entity. They are subject to the laws and regulations of the locality and the state.
yes,
So politicians that know literally nothing about education are voting on how to run
I mean
education.
that's true of anything, right? They're also voting
Yeah.
on how to run transportation and health safety standard.
Yeah, that's it.
You know what I
Oh,
mean?
let's not get into the health and safety
Right.
standards.
But your point is
Yeah.
made, right? Like,
Yeah.
and so but it takes a kind of a unified front to try to
Hmm.
communicate to folks making these kinds of policy level influential decisions that will change
Hmm.
the trajectory and mandate changes to happen, things like the statewide test. And that's why I think that the real shift needs to happen at the school and district level first.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I do absolutely do believe, because I've seen it happen in small pockets. Okay.
Mm.
That if the shift of thinking around assessment as a process is happening at within even a team of teachers,
Hmm.
okay, and they are considering what I call compassionate assessment. There's four components: the technical quality, the environment, the attitudes and beliefs of the adults, and the attitudes and beliefs of the students. And if they're considering and attending to all of those components, starting at the top of school, right?
Hmm.
Then you are creating a culture around this activity we called assessment and testing that reduces the anxiety, reduces the choices that will lead to less instructional time with this like weird test prep stuff that we feel like we have to do,
Yeah.
when it doesn't improve test scores, because what we're trying to do is not that's not the goal of education, guys. The goal of education is the test scores. The goal of education is to teach the kids, for the kids to learn, right?
Hmm.
So if we're really focusing on the instruction, we're using assessment as a process to inform the instruction well, and we're really working with the students so they are understanding grade level content, the test scores will take care of themselves.
Hmm.
I truly believe this. I have seen it happen.
And I
And,
have to say, anecdotally, I was in high school. I graduated high school in 2005. So I was one of the first couple grades that dealt with the No Child Left Behind transition. And she's still a very good friend of mine. I was mainstreamed for public high school, and our math teacher, I loved her. Oh my God, she's amazing. She's a great person. I just love her. She was at my wedding. Like, she's great. But I remember when all this stuff started happening, and she was one of those old teachers that you could always just ask questions to, and she had seen it all, so nothing really fazed her anymore. And we all said, like, what's the deal with all this testing? Why are we having to do all these tests now? Like, what's going on? And she just rolled her eyes, and she was like, she just stopped and turned around to the class, and she was like, look, I'm teaching how I've always taught. And every teacher should teach how they've always taught. And if they're changing how they're teaching, then they know what they were doing was wrong in the first place. And I was like,
oh,
now you know why I love this woman. Like,
oh yeah.
she's a bitch. She has like she didn't put up with anybody's crap. She was that old teacher that everybody walked into her room, one acted up, and everyone respected her immediately. Like her room just had like aura of respect and calm, and just like I don't know how to describe it, but you know what I
You
mean.
did. You just
Like,
did. Yeah.
yeah,
She
you just,
held the space.
yeah,
Yeah.
like you knew that this was why you were here in this class. And like, she wasn't mean. She wasn't heavy handed. It was just like, I don't know.
You know what she
She's
probably was?
amazing.
She was probably consistent.
Yeah, she was.
And there was, if you ever called her on anything, she probably had a real good why.
She did. And one thing she never did, and I took this into my own teaching career, and because she's such a great teacher and such a great mentor to me, I took this into my own teaching career, is not to call students out in front of other students when it's an academic struggle.
Mm-hmm.
If it's like a behavioral thing that you need to make an example of, that happens like once a semester or so. Like, you know what I mean? But if
it's already a performative kind of behavior, right?
Right.
And so everybody's already privy to the acting out, right? There's a different approach. I
Right.
Yes, I adopted that also in my classrooms.
It's very effective. But there were also those teachers that would just be like, whenever they're handing back the tests, they would make like noises whenever they would hand back certain
like the
tests.
classroom, like their classroom tests, right?
Yeah.
Like they had a quiz. Yeah.
Yeah, and they'd be like,
pop quiz.
You,
And then they
you could do better on that. Or like, and they make like these little like condescending comments as they walk through the class and return the tests. And like, she never did that. And if a student came up to the board and they legitimately didn't know how to do the problem because it was math, the rest of the class stopped because that was not the only student that had that question.
Yeah.
And she would work with that student compassionately, because I was that student a few times. Like, she worked with you compassionately, and you never felt degraded in the way that she was helping you. And she always thanked you for helping other people understand it more when you were done. And I love her. She's amazing. But that type of, I forget even what my point was, but like,
well, like when the testing started, right? And why did we have to do this? Well,
yes,
if you go back to the kind of beginnings of No Child Left Behind, it was deemed a national crisis that we were graduating high school students that were illiterate. And so there was a report.
I'm sorry, it's not any better, and you know that. So
well,
you know,
maybe I think it's different. I think it's actually different. And the reason why I say that is that well, let me get getting sidetracked. But there's the report, A Nation at Risk.
okay,
It was a foundational report that was done, a study on what was happening, and so that's actually what contributed to the standards movement of having some sort of expectation of certain things are going to be taught at certain grade levels in certain subjects. Okay, and then the testing was implemented. It was already happening states for different things. It was implemented through No Child Left Behind on the national level to basically be used as the accountability measure to ensure that, okay, now we have these standards you're supposed to be teaching. Are the students getting exposed to that grade level content? Okay. So this is all about the adults in the system. It was all about, what are you doing to teach the students, adults, right? This is a systems level data collection intended for systems level decision making. Okay. So going back to, you said, hey, what do we do for those parents, right? That their kid comes home, if they're in a school situation, and they're like, this is the most important test. It's not about them. And make sure that your kid knows that. It's not about them as an individual. This is about how they contribute to the overall system, and just demonstrating what they know and can do. That's good enough. That's it. That's what it's for. And somehow over the last, few decades, it's gotten to this place where, like I said, I think it's Goodhart's law in action. We've forgotten that our intention is to make sure every kid can read. We've forgotten that our intention is to ensure that every kid has these skills across a variety of subjects so that they can be an informed citizen in our country. And then they have choices after this mandatory education. Okay. Mandatory education. Obligatory education is an experiment. right? So I think we've forgotten what the goal is, and that's for kids to learn and to learn across this breadth of knowledge of reading and writing and mathematics and history and science and other things. We have music, we have art, we have other topics in our schools for reasons, and it's to make a well-rounded, informed citizen. And I
Mm-hmm.
think we've totally lost our way in making the test scores the goal.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, how do we fix it? We remind people what the goal is and put testing back in its place. It's going to take a mind shift, a shift in mindset. It's going to take training, because here's the other thing: a lot of teachers, they don't actually get formal training in assessment.
No,
It's
not
kind of
like
embedded. Yeah.
not on a. So I graduated from college in 2010, with my secondary social studies degree. And we had one course. It was like half of the course was on how to create effective assessment. I was in a really good program though, but it was like how to create effective assessment for your classroom and how to actually create those multiple choice questions so they're not gotcha questions and so that you eliminate as much of your own bias as possible.
Mhm.
That was actually a really interesting course to take, but looking at it as like a state or national level and how that stuff is used, how to use it outside of like the immediate classroom application of it, that wasn't really covered. It was just something you have to do, and you have to do whatever your district tells you to do to prep for it.
Yeah,
Is pretty
and
much what we
that's
were
what's
told. And that
happened.
was back in 2010, like 2009, 2010. So this has been going on for close to 15 years minimum.
Yeah, I mean, the first real class in assessment I got was as a master's student. So I was already in the classroom for years before I had had that class. I had already had measurement because of my own trajectory, you know what I mean? So I already
Mm-hmm.
had kind of a background in statistics and statistical analyses. And I've always been a little nerdy,
Aren't we
obviously.
all?
But um so I was a little bit of an exception, right? Because I was coming in. I was not a liberal arts major. I didn't go through college thinking I was going to be a teacher. That was a
Right.
decision I made later in my 20s, you know. And a lot of teachers, like, I just want to make sure that I'm clear, because I really it, it we're not preparing our teachers to
No.
approach assessment in the way I'm talking about. That's why it's not just a mindset shift. There is a training shift that needs to happen, for teachers and for administrators, so that
It'll
they
be a
really
systemic
understand
shift that'll have to
it.
happen in the mindset starting
Yeah.
from teacher training up.
Yeah. And so the only way that we can do this, from my perspective, well, maybe not the only way, but the way I can see a path forward, um, I'm going to tell you, I've had my days where I've thought it was hopeless. I've struggled over the years of my career that I thought that this is just an unsolvable problem. But I always come back to a real core belief that nothing's unsolvable if we just keep working at it and we get enough people working on the problem. So I do see a pathway towards it, and it's going to start in small spaces with teams of teachers working with an administrator's support. It's going to happen in our small schools where they can really shift practices quicker because it's a smaller group of adults, who are connected to their communities. I really worry about our brand new teachers and our brand new administrators, because they're walking into this is only one of the challenges that they're facing. Um, but as far as the way we're approaching assessment, I do believe that in these smaller spaces, and I mean smaller population wise, right? Not
So more like the
just,
rural schools and
yeah,
the
your
suburban
rural
schools
schools
for.
or private schools,
Okay.
right?
Hello. You don't know me yet. I'm editing, Katie. It's very nice to meet you. So, Dr. Mary Cochran and I are pretty good friends at this point, and I don't know if you can tell, but we can literally talk about education topics for hours, which is what we did when we were recording this first episode with her solo. And I thought that it was only right for me to split it up into 2 episodes. So this is part 1, and there will be part 2 coming up next week. So make sure to tune in for that. If you're not following us, please make sure to like, subscribe, follow, leave a comment or a review. If you're listening on audio, leave us a 5-star review. It really, really helps if you enjoyed the conversation. It helps us get these conversations that help educate people about education out to as many people as possible, because that's our whole goal here, is to help people understand their education system better and then give them actionable steps that they can take to actually improve their situation and their student situation, like today. So that's what we're actually doing in part 2 that I'm publishing next week. We're going to be talking about high stakes testing and why it is, and what you can do as the parent to help mitigate its effects on your students, as well as a plethora of other topics, because Mary and I just kind of get going and you never know what we're going to talk about. So if you enjoyed this conversation, please do make sure to head over and follow Mary on Facebook and LinkedIn at MetamureEd, and you can also find her at metamureed.com. We also would love it if you would follow One Room Education. You can follow us on Facebook, Rumble, and YouTube at One Room Education, all one word. And you can follow us on X, Instagram, and TikTok at OneRoom_Ed. Thank you so much for joining us. Please, if you enjoyed this conversation, please do make sure that you head over to our website, one-roomeducation.com. That's the word one, ONE-roomeducation.com, where you can find our full catalog of blogs and podcast episodes, as well as the One Room Classroom, which is our educational platform that we're developing specifically for family style and pod style learning. That includes everything that your students are going to need, from foundational courses clear up through homeschooler professional development, which we are launching a course here in the next week, maybe 2, specifically about the topic of project-based learning. What is it? Why do you even want to know about it as a homeschool parent? And then how to use it as a homeschool parent, from one kid at your kitchen table and then scaling it up for pod and co-op style learning. So please do head over there. It also currently houses my Note-Taking 101 course, where I break down all of the major note-taking strategies and then help you create your own hybrid, customized note-taking strategy for the way that you learn and the environment that you're learning in. It's great for not only students starting around 4th grade, but it's an amazing brush up for professionals as well. It makes you a more well-rounded and efficient data collector. So just throwing that out there. And we also have the Bill of Rights 101 presented by Francis Cook, where he breaks down the first 10 amendments of the U.S. Constitution and how they apply to you. That is for grades 6 through 12 and up. It is a great refresher course for adults also, to make sure that you're fully understanding what your rights actually are and what the government is and isn't allowed to do. So please do head over to the website one-roomeducation.com and join us. Click the Join Us button so that you can become a member and help support us and our content and our mission to help empower parents, students, and educators. Thank you so much for joining us here on the podcast today, and I will see you next week as we continue our discussion with Dr. Mary Cochron on the state of education.